OMG! I accidentally lost my virginity to a hot cab driver. "Screw you, Liam," I muttered, my voice thick with a mix of alcohol and heartbreak. The words spilled out, bitter and raw, as the rain poured down around me. My hair was plastered to my forehead, and my jacket was useless against the relentless downpour. I held the neck of an empty whiskey bottle in one hand, its cheap burn still lingering in my throat. He'd done it. He'd really done it. Liam had broken up with me in front of everyone at the party, where half the college was present. His voice calm and detached, while I stood there, humiliated and unravelling. "You're just not good enough for me," he'd said, his words cutting like a knife. "I need someone who can keep up with me, Roman. Someone who actually has ambition." He'd smiled, as if he hadn't just ripped my heart out and stomped on it in front of all of our friends. My friends had pretended not to watch, but their pitying glances were worse than anything Liam could have said. Anger bubbled up, hot and unrelenting. I glared at the bottle in my hand, and before I could stop myself, I hurled it at the pavement. The crash echoed through the night, glass scattering like the shards of my pride. The rain soaked through my clothes, chilling me to the bone as I swayed on unsteady feet. I'd been standing on this curb for what felt like hours, waiting for the cab I'd called. My so-called escape plan was taking its sweet time, and I was starting to regret everything. The whiskey, the breakup, my entire night. "Oh, where the hell is this guy?" I grumbled, squinting down the street. My patience had been washed away along with the last shreds of my dignity. Headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the curtain of rain. A car rolled up and stopped right in front of me. The driver's side window started to lower, but I didn't give them a chance to speak. "Took you long enough," I barked, yanking the door open. My foot slipped a little on the wet pavement, and I banged my head on the roof in the process. "Ow! For crying out loud!" I cursed under my breath, rubbing the sore spot as I half fell, half climbed into the back seat. The leather was warm against my rain-soaked jeans, and I let out a frustrated sigh, slumping back. "Just drive," I muttered, waving a hand in the air. "Wherever. I don't care." My head lolled against the seat, and I closed my eyes, ignoring the sting of tears that threatened to spill. The faint scent of something, leather, maybe cologne, tickled my nose. It was oddly comforting, but I was too drunk and too tired to care. My life was officially a mess, and tonight I was just along for the ride. A little while later. We'd been driving for a while, the steady rhythm of the tyres on the wet road doing something strange to me. The tension in my body, the anger I'd been carrying around for who knows how long, started to loosen a little. The rain kept up its steady beat against the roof, like some kind of soundtrack to my racing thoughts. I ran a hand through my damp hair, leaning back into the seat with a deep sigh. That's when he first spoke. "Rough night?" The voice came low and smooth, laced with amusement. I cracked an eye open, ready to snap back, but the sight of him in the mirror made me forget my words. He was... damn. Dark hair, sharp jawline, hazel eyes that glinted even in the dim light from the street lamps. His lips curved into a faint smirk that made me forget what I was going to say. "You could say that," I mumbled. suddenly feeling way too aware of my own skin. My face heated up. Fuck, I was blushing. I turned to the window, pretending I was suddenly fascinated by the rain streaking down it. Well, at least the rain's washing away whatever's left of it, he said, his voice easy, confident. I laughed, more out of surprise than anything. Yeah, no kidding. My eyes drifted back to him, tracing the lines of his profile as he drove. His confidence. It was magnetic. I felt this pull towards him, like the space in the car was too small, too thick with something I couldn't name. I shifted, but it didn't help. I was still aware of him in a way I hadn't been with anyone in, well, a while. You're staring, he said, without even looking over, his smirk stretching a little wider. I froze. What? No, I'm not. My voice came out too defensive, and I hated that it did. He chuckled, a low, warm sound that made my stomach tighten in a way I didn't want to admit. I turned back to the window, hoping it would make the heat in my face go away. But every time he shifted, every time his fingers tapped the wheel, my skin prickled. I couldn't ignore it. I was drunk, sure, but I wasn't so far gone that I couldn't feel this pull, this tension that seemed to grow with every second. I didn't even realize the car had stopped until I blinked, looking around. We weren't at my place. We were parked on a quiet street. Why are we? I started, but he was already looking back at me, his eyes meeting mine, and suddenly the air between us felt heavy, charged. You okay back there? He asked, his tone shifting, softer, more serious. But underneath it, there was something else, something that made my pulse jump. I swallowed, my mouth dry. Yeah. My voice cracked, betraying me, and I saw his eyebrow rise. Without thinking, I leaned forward. Thanks for, driving me. My words came out clumsy, and I cursed under my breath when I felt my cheeks heat up again. Just doing my part, he said, and then his eyes flicked to my lips for just a second. It was enough. Something inside me snapped. Before I knew what I was doing, I was moving toward him, pressing my lips to his. For a moment he froze, his body tense under mine. Then he let out a soft sigh and kissed me back. His hand found my jaw, firm but gentle, and I melted. The whiskey, the heat of his mouth, the way his body was solid against mine, it all blurred into a rush of warmth. My head spun. I was drunk. Too drunk. That could be the only explanation for my actions. I'm a virgin, for crying out loud. I hadn't even gone this far with Liam. And now I was, hooking up with a stranger in the back of a car? But soon his hands moved to my hips, pulling me closer, and all those thoughts about how I'd never done anything like this, how I barely knew his name, vanished. It didn't matter. Nothing did. He felt like fire against me, like something I needed. I didn't care that I didn't know this guy, didn't care that I'd never let anyone get this close before. He was all I could think about, the heat between us consuming everything. Reckless? Yeah. Wild? Definitely. Exactly what I needed? Hell yes. 5 months later. It's been months since that disastrous night. The night my ex dumped me in front of the crowd, and I ended up in the back of a cab with some guy I barely knew, kissing him like my life depended on it. The whole thing was a blur, and I swore I'd forget it. Now, months later, I was starting a new chapter. I had landed an internship at a prestigious company, and I was determined to leave the past behind me. My first day was supposed to be the start of something exciting, something that would set me on the right path. I walked into the building, trying to hold it together. But then I saw him, the cab driver, standing outside the building, just under the awning, looking like he was waiting for someone. My stomach dropped. I thought I was imagining things, but no, it was definitely him. I quickly shook it off, telling myself it was just a coincidence. But then, when I got inside the building, there he was again, talking to the receptionist like he belonged there. My heart raced and a wave of panic hit me. Was he stalking me? What the hell was going on? I tried to play it cool, but everything inside me screamed that this was more than just a weird coincidence. My mind kept racing. Was this my life now? Caught in some twisted replay of that night? A few hours later. I tried to brush it off. It was a big building, a busy place. The cab driver could have been here for any reason. Maybe he worked in the building. Maybe he was just a visitor. I couldn't focus on that right now. I had to focus on the internship, my first day. The orientation was a blur of names, faces, and introductions. My manager, a no-nonsense woman who was surprisingly friendly, led the group, explaining everything with efficiency. I listened intently, trying to make a good impression, not letting anything distract me. I was here for a fresh start, and I wasn't going to screw it up. We walked through the halls, the polished floors reflecting the bright lights. It was everything I'd hoped for. Professional, organised, a real step up. I could feel my nerves starting to settle. This was where I was meant to be. That was when my manager stopped in front of an office door, gave a small knock, and opened it. "Roman, I want to introduce you to someone," she said, her smile almost too big for how casual the moment felt. "This is your department head." I walked in, expecting to meet someone in a suit or tie, someone older, more serious looking. But then I froze. There, standing by the desk, was him, the cab driver, the same guy from that night. The same guy who'd kissed me like it was no big deal, who'd haunted my thoughts ever since. I stared at him, my brain struggling to catch up. Was this a joke? My manager looked between us, clearly not sensing the sudden tension in the room. "Roman, meet Caspian. He'll be overseeing your work here." She turned to Caspian. "Roman's our newest intern." Caspian's eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second, I thought I might pass out. This was insane. 2 weeks later. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting. It was my second week, and I was still getting the hang of everything. The office was busy, everyone rushing around, making phone calls and typing away on their computers. I sat at my desk, trying to get through a report, but all I could think about was him, Caspian, my boss, the guy who had driven me home that night, and now here he was, my boss, leading the department like it was no big deal. I tried to push it out of my head. He was my boss, and I had a job to do. So, I buried myself in the work, hoping it would distract me. But every time I looked up from my screen, I found him. Caspian was there, moving around the office, talking to people, his eyes always scanning the room. And every time our gazes met, it was like a jolt of electricity shot through me. His stare lingered just a little too long, a little too intense. I couldn't figure out why he was like this. Why had he been driving a cab that night? He had to be rich with a job like this, so what the hell was he doing behind the wheel of a taxi? It didn't make sense, and the more I thought about it, the more I felt like something was off, like I was missing a huge piece of the puzzle. I kept my distance. I made sure to avoid him as much as possible. Every time he walked into the room, I found some excuse to look away, to pretend I wasn't noticing the way his eyes seemed to follow me. But it was getting harder to ignore. His gaze was magnetic, like it was pulling me in without me even realizing it. And damn it, I hated how much it affected me. The chemistry was there, unspoken but undeniable, and it made everything between us so much more complicated. A week later, I picked up the phone, and it was Caspian. "Roman, I need you to come by my office for a minute," he said, his tone calm, professional. "There's something we need to go over." I hesitated, but agreed, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my stomach. I had been avoiding him, but it was impossible to escape the reality of my job. So, I grabbed my things and headed to his office. I walked into Caspian's office, trying to keep my nerves under control. He looked up from his desk, his expression neutral, his eyes locked onto mine, and I couldn't help but feel that familiar tension building between us. I sat down, forcing myself to focus on the work in front of me. "So, Roman," Caspian started, his voice smooth, "I need you to take a look at this report and give me your thoughts. We're aiming for a quick turnaround, so I'd appreciate your feedback today." I nodded, trying to stay professional. I skimmed through the document, the words blurring as my mind kept drifting back to that night. The way his eyes had looked at me in the car, the kiss. It all felt so strange now, so out of place. I pushed it aside, trying to focus on the task at hand. But I could feel Caspian's gaze lingering on me, like he was studying me. "Is everything okay?" he asked, breaking my concentration. His voice was casual, but there was an edge to it, like he knew something was off. I looked up, swallowing hard. Yeah, yeah." Caspian raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. He smirked, leaning back into his chair. "You know, I won't bite. Unless you want me to." What?" I exclaimed, feeling all the blood rush to my face. How could he say something like that so casually? Caspian laughed out loud. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, still laughing, almost in tears. "God, you're cute when you're shy. I know you have been avoiding me because of that night, but you can't keep working with so much pressure on you. Loosen up. I promise I really won't bite," he added with a wink. I just don't get why you were driving a cab that night. Is that something you do in your extra time?" I questioned, finally letting it off my chest. "Here's the thing," he continued, still grinning. "I wasn't driving a cab that night. I was just out for a drive when I saw someone drunk stumbling around in the rain. I simply pulled over to make sure they were okay. You, on the other hand, climbed into my Bentley like it was a taxi." I stared at him, feeling every ounce of embarrassment flood through me. "Wait, what? I can't believe this." Caspian leaned back in his chair, watching me with a mixture of amusement and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "Yeah, well, you weren't really in your right mind. I'd say I didn't take advantage, but... He paused, a teasing glint in his eyes. I guess that depends on your definition of taking advantage. I buried my face in my hands, mortified all over again. This is just ridiculous. A week later. It started small, unexpected really. I was in the break room, waiting for the coffee machine to do its thing, when I sensed someone beside me. Turning slightly, I found Caspian standing there, a mug in hand, looking far too calm for how awkward I felt. "Morning," he said, his voice warm, like it was just another day. "Morning," I replied, trying not to sound as jittery as I felt. He glanced at the machine and then back at me. "Long wait, huh?" "Yeah," I said, with a weak chuckle. "Story of my life." To my surprise, he smiled. Not his usual smirk, but something softer. "Well, coffee fixes most things, at least temporarily." I nodded, unsure of what to say, but he didn't seem in any rush to leave. Instead, he leaned against the counter, looking entirely at ease, like we weren't standing in the middle of an awkward history. "I've been meaning to tell you," he started, his tone casual. "You're doing a great job with the analysis work. Not everyone picks it up as quickly as you have." That caught me off guard. "Oh, thanks. That means a lot." He took a sip of his coffee, his gaze lingering on me. "You've got potential, Roman. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I blinked, caught between the weight of his words and the way he said my name, like it meant something. The moment stretched, quiet, but not uncomfortable. I managed a small smile. "I'll keep that in mind." He nodded, pushing off the counter. "Good. Now, go easy on the coffee. Can't have my best intern crashing from caffeine overload." I laughed, the tension easing as he walked out. For the first time, I felt like maybe we weren't just stuck in some awkward limbo. 3 days later. The office was nearly empty, the hum of computers and the occasional clack of a keyboard the only sounds. I was hunched over my desk, battling a spreadsheet that refused to cooperate. "You're still here?" Caspian's voice startled me. I looked up to find him standing nearby, his jacket slung over his arm. "Yeah," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "Trying to finish this before tomorrow." He stepped closer, peering over my shoulder at the screen. His presence was magnetic, and I couldn't help but notice how his shirt fit just a little too well. "You're overthinking it," he said, pointing at a section. His hand brushed mine briefly, and I felt a jolt. I followed his advice, and the numbers finally clicked. "Huh, that actually worked. Thanks." Caspian grinned, his hazel eyes glinting in the low light. "Told you, experience pays off." I couldn't help but smile. "Guess I'll have to keep you around." "Thank you, sir." He tilted his head, studying me. "Caspian." I blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "Call me Caspian," he said simply, his voice low. "It's just a name." I swallowed hard, the way he said it making the air between us feel heavier. "All right, Caspian." His gaze lingered for a moment, his lips curving into a faint smile. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" I shook my head, suddenly hyper-aware of the space, or lack thereof, between us. "No, I guess not." He straightened, his eyes still holding mine. "Don't stay too late, Roman." As he walked away, the sound of his name still lingered on my tongue, like it carried a weight I wasn't ready to unpack. A month later, Caspian and I had fallen into this strange rhythm. We worked well together, bantering during late nights at the office and sharing coffee breaks that stretched longer than they should. But lately, something had shifted. It was the way his eyes lingered a second too long when I spoke, or how his tone softened when he said my name. Little things I might have missed if I wasn't hyper-aware of him. One evening, we were going over a presentation in his office. I sat across from him, trying to focus on the slides, but all I could think about was the way he leaned forward, his sleeves rolled up, exposing strong forearms. He looked too good, and it was distracting as hell. "Roman?" he asked, snapping me out of my thoughts. Yeah?" I stammered, heat rushing to my face. "You've been staring at the same slide for 5 minutes." I laughed nervously. Just thinking." Caspian leaned back in his chair, studying me. His hazel eyes were intense, like they could see straight through me. "You've been distracted lately. Everything all right?" I nodded quickly, but his gaze didn't waver. I'm fine. Just a lot on my mind." His lips curved into a small smile, but there was something in his expression, something unspoken. "Well, if you ever want to talk, you know where to find me." The air between us felt heavy, charged with tension. For a moment, I thought about saying something, but I couldn't. Not when this professional line between us loomed so large. Instead, I nodded, muttered a quick "thanks," and left his office, my heart pounding. If he felt the same way, this was going to get a lot more complicated. A week later, we were alone in his office after everyone else had left. The day had been exhausting, but the tension between us felt sharper than ever. "You've been avoiding me," Caspian said, his voice calm but firm. I froze. I haven't?" "Of course, I have been. That's the one thing keeping me sane." "Yes, you have." He stood, crossing the room, until he was right in front of me. "If it's still about that night, just say so." I swallowed hard. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" he pressed, his hazel eyes locked on mine. "You think I don't feel it too?" The honesty in his words left me reeling. I looked away, trying to gather my thoughts, but he reached out, gently tilting my chin back towards him. "Look at me," he said softly. "Tell me you don't feel it too." I couldn't. The pull between us was too strong, and the way he was looking at me, like I was the only thing that mattered, was impossible to ignore. "I do," I whispered, my voice barely audible. His expression softened, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he leaned in, giving me plenty of time to stop him. But I didn't. When his lips met mine, it was like everything else faded away. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, but when I responded, it deepened, all the tension and unspoken words between us pouring out. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, both of us breathing hard. We'll figure this out," he murmured, his voice full of quiet determination. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Yeah, We will. 2 weeks later. Dating Caspian, secretly of course, was a whirlwind I hadn't expected but couldn't get enough of. The thrill of stolen moments made everything feel sharper, brighter. Like now, as I sat at my desk pretending to focus on a report while my phone buzzed softly beside me. Lunch on the roof? His text was simple, but I could feel the warmth behind it. I glanced around to make sure no one was paying attention before replying, "Give me 5." 5 minutes later, I was up on the rooftop, the city sprawling out before me. Caspian was already there, leaning casually against the railing, a faint smile tugging at his lips when he saw me. "Hey," I said, trying not to grin too widely as I walked over. "Hey," he replied, handing me a sandwich. "Figured you might be hungry." We sat side by side, talking about everything and nothing. His laugh, which wasn't something you heard often in the office, was warm and unguarded, and it made my chest ache in the best way. As the wind tousled my hair, he reached out, brushing a stray strand from my face. The gesture was small, fleeting, but it sent a rush of warmth through me. This was ours, a secret, a risk, but so worth it. For the first time in forever, I felt genuinely happy. A month later. As Caspian and I returned from a delightful evening together, the city lights casting a warm glow around us, we paused near my apartment building. The night had been perfect, filled with laughter and easy conversation, and as we stood close, the anticipation of a good night kiss hung in the air. Just as our lips were about to meet, a familiar voice called out, "Roman, wait!" I turned to see Liam, my ex-boyfriend, approaching with a look of earnest regret. Caspian's hand tensed in mine. "Let's go," he murmured, clearly hoping I'd ignore the interruption. But something in Liam's expression made me pause. "I need to hear him out," I said softly. Caspian's eyes searched mine for a moment before he nodded, releasing my hand, and walked away. Once we were alone, Liam began. "Roman, I'm so sorry for how things ended between us. I made a mistake, and I want another chance." His words stirred memories, but as he continued, I noticed a familiar pattern. He spoke of missing the fun times, the physical connection, but there was no mention of a deeper understanding or emotional growth. "We had good times," I acknowledged. "But what exactly do you miss?" Liam hesitated, then said, "The excitement, the passion. Don't you remember how great we were together?" I did remember. The surface-level thrills, the fleeting moments of pleasure. But standing there, I realised how hollow it all felt compared to what I had with Caspian. With him, there was depth, genuine connection, and a sense of being truly seen and valued. "Liam," I said gently, "I appreciate your apology, but I've moved on. What we had wasn't what I need now." He looked taken aback. "Is it because of him?" "It's because of me," I replied. "I found someone who understands me in ways I didn't think possible. I hope you find that too." With that, I turned and headed inside, my heart clear and resolute. Caspian was waiting. I knew it in my heart that he was, and the warmth of the thought was enough to reaffirm my decision. I was exactly where I was meant to be. A few minutes later, I sprinted after Caspian, my heart pounding. "Caspian, wait!" I called out. He stopped and turned, his expression a mix of surprise and hurt. "What are you doing here? Where's your friend?" he asked, bitterness edging his voice. I couldn't help but chuckle. "Is someone jealous?" "No, of course not," he retorted, crossing his arms. "I don't even care." I cut him off, stepping close and pressing my lips to his in a hard, desperate kiss. When we finally broke apart, I looked into his eyes and said, "I love you." His eyes widened in shock. "What did you say?" "I love you," I repeated, my voice steady. "I've loved you for a while now, but I guess I had to realize it. I have now. I love you, Caspian, so much." A slow smile spread across his face, and he pulled me into his arms. "I love you too, more than anything, since the day I first saw you." He kissed me again, this time with a tenderness that made my chest ache. I melted into him, feeling his warmth, his strength, and the overwhelming certainty that this was it. As his arms tightened around me, I realized I wasn't just in his embrace. I was home. Conclusion. 5 years. It's been 5 incredible years since that wild, rainy night when I mistook Caspian's Bentley for a cab and turned both our worlds upside down. Standing here now, at the altar, looking into his eyes, it's almost impossible to believe how it all started. A misunderstanding that somehow became the best thing that ever happened to me. Caspian's smile is steady, reassuring, and full of love. He's my partner, my rock, my home. The life we've built together is everything I didn't know I needed. As we exchange vows, I can't help but think of our future, traveling the world, starting a family, and growing old together. This is where I'm meant to be. With him. Always. The end. Have you ever had a happy misunderstanding? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our rainbow force and stay wholesome.